Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm here with my review for The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. The first part of this review is going to be spoiler-free, so you can decide if it sounds like something you want to pick up. And then at the end of the video, I will get into more of my spoilery thoughts and feels. So in this novel, we follow our main character, Jude. When she's 7 years old, her parents are slaughtered in front of her, and she and her two sisters are taken away to live in faerie for the rest of their lives. The fairies are enticing and dangerous at the same time, and surrounded by all this perfection, Jude can't help but want to be one of them. It's a lot harder than it appears because, of course, the majority of fairies despise the human race. So I loved this book so much. First off, the setting. As the summary of this book implies, a majority of it takes place in the land of faerie, and I absolutely loved that. I think Holly Black has really nailed that feeling of being in this other world, and we get little glimpses of different parts of that fairy world, and it really does pull you in and make you feel as attracted to it as Jude is, which is really important for the story, I think, to kind of go along with what she wants. And it totally worked on me. I just ate up every little bit of this world. I was so invested in the world of faerie that I felt sort of disoriented when we did finally get a glimpse of the human world, which in a way is a point in this book's favor because, again, I was sort of caught up with Jude in the magic of this world, and I didn't want to leave it. I mentioned how Holly Black has really nailed the fairy setting down, and she has also just completely blown me away with her fairy characters. She really understands that sort of dark magnetism they have for people, or for some people, and she does it so well because you see how frightening they are, you see the awful things they do, but there's a little part of you that doesn't mind, you know, that still gets caught up in their world and what they want and this horrible bloody game of politics they're playing. It's just so fascinating that you can't help but overlook some of the awful things they do along the way. Now, I think with almost any book that has such a fascinating group of non-human characters, it sometimes means that the human characters in comparison seem not as interesting. That did sort of happen in this book for me with Jude, our protagonist. I didn't hate her, and I didn't even dislike her, but compared to some of the fairy characters, she just didn't hold my attention as much as I wanted her to. This was a first-person story, so we really don't get to see from anyone else's perspectives. She did sort of go back and forth a little bit between her, like, two sides of her character. It seemed like there were a few times where she would be despairing that the fairies would never accept her and she could never get what she wanted and she would never be able to be a knight, which is what she's pursuing. And she'd go back and forth between that and then having this revelation that, like, if I can't be one of them, I will be worse than them and I'm going to, like, rip this world from its foundations, and all of this great, like, character development. But then we'd kind of go back and forth between those two things in different chapters. But that didn't last forever, luckily. And again, I loved everything else about this book so much that didn't drag it down at all for me. I did really empathize with Jude's desire to be a part of this fairy world because, as I said, I was as fascinated and entranced by it as she was. And the plot itself was also just so fantastically, like, twisty and intricate and well plotted, and I adored it. There were a couple of lulls where we were building up to something big, but I didn't really mind it because it gave us time to, like, settle down and get to know some of the characters more and really ramp up the tension. So I really enjoyed the actual story elements of this book too. I also really enjoyed the writing style in this book. Holly Black has this really interesting way of blending really lovely quotes and atmospheric writing with modern speech. And I think in almost every case in this book that really worked, and it really contributed to that sort of, like, meeting of the two worlds, you know, the human and the fairy, and, like, the human characters and the fairy characters. So I think that also really contributed to the book. Of course, as I was really hoping from this book, there was a really great amount of darkness to this story. Like, Holly doesn't shy away from showing the despicable things that people, humans or fairies, will do in order to get what they want or to protect people they care about, and I really appreciated that and enjoyed it in a really kind of weird way. You know, sometimes it's nice to be promised a dark and twisty story and to actually get it. And finally, this is the Barnes & Noble special edition or whatever, and it does come with a short story in the very back of the book. It's a very short story. And I did read that and I did really enjoy it. So this is one of the only times where I feel like the special edition might actually be worth buying. I think I like the original cover a little more, but I did love the sort of background we got on side characters in that short story. The only thing is now I'm going to be really disappointed if we don't see a lot of them in the next book. I think those characters are crossovers from her Modern Faerie series, so if you have read that series, which I have not, you probably will see some familiar faces. So that is everything I have that is non-spoiler for my thoughts on The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. As you can probably tell, I freaking loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. Even the small, like, caveats or little tiny things that, like, pulled it down for me weren't enough to lower my rating because every other aspect of this book was just done so well. I don't think the praise of this book was exaggerated, and when people call Holly Black the queen of fairies, I think they're right. Okay, so I am now going to get into some of my more spoilery thoughts because, guys, I have some things I need to say. So I would highly recommend that if you haven't read the book yet, you don't watch this part of the video, you know, you go and read it first and then come back and we can talk about it because I really don't want to spoil you. So if you haven't read it yet, then goodbye for now, and I hope you enjoy The Cruel Prince. Okay, so let's talk about some of these plot twists. I did not see Madoc's betrayal coming. It was so crazy because we're introduced to him when he murders the main character's parents in front of her. And somehow he was still one of my favorite characters for like the majority of the book. It makes sense why he turned out to be like the betrayer, but it also makes me a little sad because I feel like there's gonna be, we have to have him die at some point in the series now because he's sort of standing in the way of what Jude and Cardan need and want for Faerie, and it just, I don't know. I'm a little bit afraid for Madoc, even though he can obviously take care of himself and he's not a great person, but still kind of one of my faves. So I'm really interested to see where things go with him and if we can maybe get him onto our side, you know, with Jude. And I totally knew something was fishy about Locke. Like, I did not trust him. And even when we got some of those really, like, sort of sweet scenes with him and Jude, there was this little part of me that's like, this is too easy. Like, well, for one thing, we know that she's got to be involved with Cardan, at least at some point. Also, just, he seemed too nice for one of the fairies. And especially when compared with Cardan and like some of the other characters who are not as bad as they appear, I was like, we gotta have some who are worse, who are like turn out worse than we think they are, and Locke was one of them. So another character that I really didn't like, and I was surprised at because I was actually really enjoying her in the beginning of the book, was Jude's sister Taryn. Like, why was she there? You know, I sort of feel like we didn't need her. Like, she only existed to like create more betrayal and angst for Jude. I'm kind of sad because at the beginning I thought I was really gonna enjoy her and she might be one of my favorite characters. Like that thing she says to Jude about like, oh, I'm just gonna fall in love with a fairy. Like, that's much easier. I thought that was really funny and like honestly kind of relatable, and I thought I was gonna really love Taryn, and then that whole thing with Locke happens and I just like, Worst Sister of the Year award. Got to the point where, like, when Jude challenges her to a duel and they're, like, you know, trying to destroy each other, I was, like, so happy. Because I'm like, God, we gotta get Taryn out of the way here. Like, knock her head off or something. Or, like, do something so that she's not interfering in the rest of the plot. Because, honestly, tired of your drama, Taryn. Just, like, get over yourself. Like, the whole fairy world is at stake. And you're just, like, making problems with your boyfriend. It sounds really bad that I just wanted her dead to simplify things, but really you read this book for long enough and you sort of start thinking like the fairies do, where it's like people are either assets or annoyances, and Taryn was definitely an annoyance. I guess I'm glad that Jude and Taryn like didn't actually, one of them didn't kill the other, but I hope something happens in the next book where we either make Taryn into a redeemable character, or we just sort of stop following her, because I am just not interested in her subplot anymore. Did any of you guys think it was sort of weird that, like, the lead up to the coronation drama was so, like, low-key, relatively speaking? Like, there wasn't a lot of, like, drama or, like, loss or battles or anything. I mean, except for that, like, awful thing with Jude and, like, getting bullied and, like, that fairy fruit. Like, that was terrible. But as far as, like, character deaths or, you know, high stakes or anything, it was sort of like nothing really happened. And then all of a sudden, just everyone gets slaughtered. It felt like every named character who wasn't in, like, the core, I guess 2 or 3, you could say, just got brutally murdered. We were, like, making up for lost time because now everyone's dead. And that kiss with Jude and Carden, holy shit. I don't know how I feel about it because it was great and I was super happy, but then I knew that something would have to go wrong because we can't have them. Like, this is like set up to be like this awesome, like, slow burn, angsty, like, takes forever relationship. So I knew something would have to go wrong because we can't have them getting together halfway through the first book. And sure enough, Jude tricks him and just... I mean, I'm sure they're probably going to work things out, but... Although, speaking of Jude betraying him, her character development was kind of amazing. Like, I'm here for it. For her finally, like, taking charge and getting things done. Just being this awesome warrior and just, like, slaying all of the enemies in her path. Like, I'm really excited about it, and I'm really looking forward to the next book for a lot of reasons. But one of the big ones is, like, I want to see where Jude is now. Like, we've seen that she's willing to do some, like, pretty awful things. Like, she's starting to actually be part of that faerie morality sense, which is really interesting. So I want to know, like, is she gonna sustain that? I don't know. I hope whatever she does do, it's more decisive than she felt in the beginning of this book, but I'm really excited. So another example of this whole, like, starting to think like the fairies thing, I totally called that Jude was gonna poison Maddox. I knew that was gonna happen before their fight, and then it did, and I was like, oh, I was right, I feel great. But she didn't kill him, and like I said, Maddox was kind of one of my favorite characters. He sort of still is, but I just feel like Jude is sparing so many people who are going to come back and ruin everything later. And, like, oh boy, that Maddox would totally do that. So I don't know how that's gonna go, but I'm nervous, I'm excited. I do like him, so I'm not that mad about it, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so that is all my, like, gushing and spoilery thoughts about the book. You guys should definitely let me know what you thought of the book. I clearly loved it. I love discussing this book. I would love to discuss it with you guys. And I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!